In the golden glow of basketball's past, there was one figure who seemed to glide above the game itself. Julius Erving, known forever as Dr. J, carried the sport into a new era with a grace that felt almost otherworldly. He did not just dunk, he painted in midair. He did not just win, he inspired. Yet behind that soaring elegance lay a deep sense of respect for the giants who shaped the game alongside him. Dr. J's career, stretching from the colorful days of the ABA to the spotlight of the NBA Finals, was a journey guided not only by his own brilliance, but also by the players he admired most. Every great artist draws inspiration from others, and Dr. J was no different. When he looked across the court, he saw men whose presence defined what basketball could be. Some were older legends whose shadows still stretched across every arena. Others were contemporaries whose duels with him created nights etched into memory. And then there were those younger stars who carried the torch forward, whose energy reminded him of the fire that once burned in his own legs. For Julius Erving, admiration was never shallow. He respected dominance when it was paired with dignity, artistry, when it was wrapped in discipline and joy, when it lifted the entire crowd to its feet. The players he held close in his memory were not simply opponents or teammates. They were reflections of the values that made the game beautiful: leadership, strength, elegance, creativity, and relentless willpower. These were the qualities that drew his admiration. Tonight we step into his world. We revisit the figures who stood out in his eyes, the ones he spoke about with genuine warmth and enduring respect. Each name tells a different story: a pillar of leadership, a force of nature, a master craftsman, a magician of joy, and finally a young heir who carried the art of flight into the next generation. These are not just names in a record book. They are the living memories of what made basketball more than a sport for Dr. J. And as we begin, we ask, who were the 5 men that left the deepest impression on the Doctor of the Skies? When Julius Erving reflected on the players who defined basketball before his time, one name always carried a special weight: Bill Russell. To the wider world, Russell was the anchor of a dynasty, the man whose very presence on the floor meant championships for Boston. To Dr. J, he was something deeper. He was the living proof that greatness was not measured only by points or highlights, but by character, dignity, and the way one carried the burden of victory. By the time Erving entered the professional game in the early 70s, Russell's playing days were behind him, yet his shadow still lingered across every arena. 11 championships in 13 years had set a standard no one could approach. But for Dr. J, what made Russell unforgettable was not only the banners that hung in the rafters. It was the calm in his eyes, the composure in his voice, and the way he turned competition into a platform for something larger. Russell's legacy was twofold on the court. He redefined defense, turning blocked shots and rebounds into the language of dominance. Off the court, he embodied courage, speaking openly about dignity and equality in a turbulent era. Erving, who would later face his own responsibilities as the face of a league merging from the colorful ABA into the global spotlight of the NBA, saw in Russell the map of how to balance success with humanity. In interviews, Dr. J often described how he admired the way Russell carried himself. He remembered seeing old footage of Russell smiling faintly after a victory, lifting the championship trophy, not as a personal prize, but as a symbol for his team. That image stayed with him. It taught him that the essence of leadership was not chest-pounding or loud declarations. It was a steady hand, a man who could calm the storm simply by walking onto the floor. There was also the matter of sacrifice. Russell was never obsessed with scoring, never interested in personal glory. His joy came from shutting down the opposing star, from clearing the glass so that his teammates could run, from doing the unglamorous work that often went unnoticed. Erving, who made his own reputation by soaring through the air in dazzling displays, found in Russell a counterbalance. Beauty in the game could take many forms. One was the elegance of flight, another was the quiet poetry of discipline and defense. Perhaps what bound Erving to Russell's story most tightly was the moral compass he provided. In the 60s, Russell endured hostility, racism, and pressures that went far beyond the hardwood. He stood firm not with bitterness, but with unshakable pride. Dr. J, as a young man watching from afar, understood that being a star meant more than just entertaining. It meant carrying responsibility, inspiring others, and never losing sight of who you were. Russell modeled that path. As Erving's own career flourished, he often found himself compared to the legends who came before. The dunks, the artistry, the aura, they were different from Russell's battles in the paint, but the lesson was the same. The game could be a vessel for something higher. When Erving looked back on Russell, he saw a reminder that championships meant nothing without integrity, that applause faded quickly unless it was rooted in respect. One memory that Dr. J cherished was the Hall of Fame ceremony, where Russell, years after retirement, was introduced not just as a champion, but as a statesman of the sport. His smile was subdued, his words few, but the entire room rose in tribute. Erving knew then that this was the true definition of immortality, not statistics, not records, but the enduring admiration of peers and generations to come. In that light, Dr. J's admiration for Russell was never about nostalgia alone. It was about recognizing the kind of greatness he wanted to embody in his own way. Russell showed him that leadership was not flashy but steady, not loud but profound. And as Erving prepared to carve his own place in the evolving history of basketball, he carried Russell's example like a compass in his heart. The connection between the two men was not forged through direct competition, but through legacy. Erving's respect for Russell was the respect of a disciple for a master. He saw in Russell a beacon of values, dignity in victory, strength in adversity, humility in triumph. For Dr. J, this was the foundation of basketball's true beauty. And so when asked who inspired him, Julius Erving would often begin with Bill Russell. Because in Russell's story lay the reminder that basketball is more than a game. It is a reflection of the human spirit. And to admire Russell was to acknowledge that spirit at its highest form. If Bill Russell represented discipline and dignity, Wilt Chamberlain embodied something else entirely. To Julius Erving, Chamberlain was the ultimate expression of human possibility, a man whose size and strength seemed drawn from mythology rather than flesh and bone. Dr. J had always soared through the air with elegance, but when he thought of Wilt, he thought of power that bent the game itself. By the time Erving was rising to fame, Wilt's days of 70 and 80-point explosions were behind him. Yet the echoes of those nights lingered in every conversation about what a single man could do with a basketball. Over 100 points in a single game. Over 20,000 rebounds across a career. Seasons where his scoring average stood above 50 points a night. For Erving, who built his identity on breathtaking style, the sheer dominance of Chamberlain stood as a reminder that artistry could be paired with overwhelming force. What fascinated Dr. J was not simply the statistics, though those numbers were staggering enough to live forever. It was the way Wilt commanded attention. The moment he entered an arena, the atmosphere changed. Opponents already knew they would be fighting gravity itself, trying to keep the giant from turning every rebound, every putback, every dunk into an inevitability. Fans held their breath, not asking whether he would dominate, but only how thoroughly. Erving respected Chamberlain because he showed that the human body could become a spectacle in its own right. Wilt did not need embellishment. He did not need to glide or dance. He planted himself in the lane, stretched his enormous reach, and bent the game around his presence. For Dr. J, who relied on finesse timing and aerial creativity, Chamberlain was the other side of the coin, proof that beauty could exist in raw strength as much as in graceful flight. Their connection was also tied to geography and heritage. Wilt had been the towering hero of Philadelphia before Erving carried the city's hopes into the 80s. For fans in that city, the lineage was clear. Chamberlain had delivered a championship in the 60s. Erving would bring another in the 80s. And for Julius, that shared thread meant carrying forward a tradition that Wilt had begun. There was also something almost mythical about Chamberlain's contradictions. He was both unstoppable and misunderstood. Critics claimed he cared more for numbers than for rings, pointing out that he won fewer titles than Bill Russell. Yet Erving looked beyond that debate. He saw a man who had been asked to carry impossible expectations, a man who played in an era where every night became a test of endurance. Wilt was judged against perfection itself, and still he left behind records no one has touched. Erving admired the way Chamberlain never shrank from that pressure. He accepted being larger than life, sometimes literally. To admire Wilt Chamberlain was to admire the game's most raw expression of dominance. For Julius Erving, it was never about envy or rivalry. It was about respect for the man who had turned basketball into a legend of power. Russell had taught him about dignity. Chamberlain showed him the scope of possibility. Together, they shaped the lens through which Dr. J understood greatness. If Wilt Chamberlain was the storm, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the calm after it, a force no less dominant, but expressed through precision and patience rather than sheer power. For Julius Erving, Kareem embodied mastery. The two met as rivals in some of the most memorable finals of the early 80s, and though the battles were fierce, Dr. J's respect for Kareem only deepened with time. What struck Erving most was Kareem's signature move, the skyhook. It was not just a shot, it was a ritual. The fluid step, the subtle lean, the release at a height no defender could reach it, seemed eternal, a gesture that defined an entire career. To fans, it was unstoppable. To Dr. J, it was also beautiful, a reminder that dominance could be elegant. He often spoke of the skyhook as if it were a brushstroke, something crafted over years of discipline until it became second nature. Erving admired Kareem for more than the move. He respected the way Kareem stretched his career across 2 decades, adjusting his body and mind to stay effective long after others had faded. While Dr. J dazzled with dunks and aerial artistry, he knew his style demanded youth and athleticism. Kareem's style, by contrast, proved that refinement and intellect could extend greatness indefinitely. For Julius, it was an important lesson: artistry may capture the crowd, but consistency earns immortality. Their encounters in the finals were intense, none more so than in 1980, when Magic Johnson's breakout performance shared the spotlight with Kareem's steady brilliance. Erving felt the sting of defeat, but he also felt the weight of Kareem's presence. There was no trash talk, no arrogance, only a quiet authority that demanded respect. Kareem never had to announce himself. He let his game and his skyhook do all the speaking. Off the court, Erving admired Kareem's intellect and the way he carried himself. Kareem was thoughtful, often distant, but never careless with his words. He pursued writing culture and social issues with the same discipline he brought to basketball. For Dr. J, that was another kind of greatness, showing that a player could be more than an athlete, could be a thinker and a voice beyond the arena. Looking back, Erving saw Kareem as the embodiment of balance, power blended with grace, competition paired with composure. It reminded him that the game was not always about the flash of a dunk or the roar of a crowd. Sometimes greatness was a single motion repeated perfectly year after year until it became timeless. As Julius left the court for the final time in 1987, he knew Kareem would keep playing still steady, still lethal, with that arc of an arm. And perhaps in that endurance lay the lesson Dr. J valued most: beauty. In basketball is not only about how high you can rise, but how long you can last. If Kareem Abdul-Jabbar symbolized quiet mastery, then Magic Johnson represented joy itself. To Julius Erving, Magic was more than an opponent across the finals. He was the spark that lit up the entire sport, the player who reminded everyone, fans and rivals alike, that basketball could be played with a smile, as bright as the arena lights. Erving admired Magic for the way he turned passing into an art form. A bounce between legs, a flick behind the head, a no-look that froze defenders in disbelief. Every assist felt like a performance designed not just to score points, but to delight. For Dr. J, who built his own career on bringing beauty to the game, Magic was a kindred spirit. He did not just play to win, he played to uplift, to connect, to turn a simple possession into a shared moment of wonder. Their clashes in the early 80s were legendary. The 1980 Finals, remembered for Magic's astonishing performance as a rookie, stepping in for an injured Kareem, left Erving and the Sixers stunned. But even in defeat, Julius respected what he saw. Magic, still barely more than a kid, had carried himself with the poise of a veteran. The way he smiled under pressure, the way he trusted his teammates, the way he lifted an entire city with his energy, those were qualities Dr. J valued deeply. Beyond the rivalry, there was admiration for Magic's leadership style. He did not dominate with intimidation. He invited others to shine with him. The Showtime Lakers thrived because Magic turned every game into a celebration where Worthy Scott and Kareem each found their moments. Erving recognized that rare gift, the ability to make others better while still being the heartbeat of the team. Off the court, Magic's openness and charisma extended the reach of basketball. He brought people in who might never have watched a game before, charming audiences on late-night shows, commercials, and community events. For Erving, this was another form of artistry. Magic had transformed the image of the sport, making it bigger, brighter, and more accessible. There was also something personal in the way Dr. J spoke of Magic. He saw in him the same desire to give fans more than a scoreboard. Both men understood that a single move could become a memory, that joy could be as enduring as victory. Magic did not just pass the ball. He passed along a feeling, one that lifted arenas and made strangers feel like part of a family. For Julius Erving, Magic Johnson was proof that greatness did not need to be grim or heavy. It could be light, it could be joyous, it could be a smile stretched across the hardwood as history unfolded. And when Dr. J thought of Magic, he thought of a man who turned basketball into a party where everyone was invited. By the time MichaelJordan entered the league in the mid-80s, Julius Erving was already a living legend. To younger players, Dr. J was the model of how basketball could be both graceful and electrifying. For Jordan himself, Erving was an idol. Yet over time, the respect became mutual. Julius looked at the rising star from Chicago and saw not just a talented guard, but the continuation of a legacy, the heir who would carry the art of flight into a new age. Jordan's dunks drew immediate comparisons to Erving. The way he elevated, suspended, and finished seemed like a reflection of what Dr. J had pioneered a decade earlier. But to Erving, Jordan was no mere copy. He added a sharper edge and intensity that made every possession feel like war. The admiration came from seeing his own style, reborn in a younger body, fused with a competitive fire that never cooled. Their paths crossed in all-star games and head-to-head matchups, moments where generations touched hands. Erving, nearing the end of his career, watched as Jordan soared past defenders with the same confidence he once carried. It was both nostalgic and inspiring. But as a successor, the doctor had opened the door. Air Jordan sprinted through it, and in that handoff, Julius found comfort. The beauty of the game would not be lost with his retirement. It would continue to evolve, carried by a player who honored the past while redefining the future. In Jordan, Dr. J saw the proof that flight had no expiration date. The art he cherished was alive, soaring higher, destined to inspire generations